Let's quickly cover off on processes and methodologies. Don't let yourself get overwhelmed by all the different approaches and methodologies and processes that are out there. These are simply tools in a toolbox that can be used for a variety of different situations depending on what you're trying to achieve. And I'll say this again, don't be precious about process. Remain open, remain fluid and adaptive to the situation and the problem. Okay, expect things to change and use everything in your toolkit to respond to the change versus forcing everything into a specific process. So let's say, for example, you're working for a product company that uses agile software development with Scrum, and they use this to release products to market. Then let's say for a minute that you're working as a part of a design team that's on a staggered sprint and development sprint model, meaning that if your company follows a 2-week development sprint model, then the design team is working from an active backlog that runs 2 weeks ahead of the development team. So by the time the development team is ready to launch into a new 2-week sprint, they're able to get prioritized stories and deliver against some of what was completed in the design sprint. But what happens if the development team is 2 days into their sprint and they catch something on the design solution that needs to be addressed? What's your approach and process for dealing with design items that need further design solutioning so, it can be built and released? Now, a product manager may simply decide to pull it out of the sprint and put it back on the design backlog so it can be addressed. But if you're thinking critically and creatively, why not just elevate that particular feature out of the sprint and quickly use something like the Lean UX approach to solve it within a day or two so it can be dropped back into the sprint to be built and released? Now, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of things that have to be in place in order for something like that to actually work and be successful, from an infrastructure standpoint, as well as access to people like, key stakeholders and customers. But the point I'm making is that while methodologies and process are extremely important, as a UX professional, you have an opportunity to think critically and creatively and to customize an approach to solving unique problems. So with that said, let's walk through these. Design thinking is hugely popular these days and started to emerge in the 1960s and went through different evolutions during the 70s and 80s and was brought into the mainstream, I believe, in the early 90s. It's definitely a great process for doing iterative design that ultimately leads to having a sized and prioritized backlog that you can start building product against. The one thing I really want to call out is the empathy piece and leading with empathy. Often I'll see folks dive into empathy exercises without any type of context and data. Okay, so to be clear, you can't have true empathy without understanding. So even if you're not able to go out and conduct primary research prior to a design thinking cycle, you can always use secondary research, which is simply just existing data or publicly available data about your target users or your target audience to provide sufficient enough data to feed those empathy exercises. Okay. Design thinking is very popular with agencies and consultancies and is often adopted, but then changed and customized to fit into their overall, client engagement model and what makes them unique in the marketplace. Now, Lean Startup is great for exactly that. Startups that are trying to get a minimal viable product to market and then acquire data to prove the business model, validate their value, and generate customer-based ideas on how to grow and expand the product. Scrum, we've already walked through a detailed example, but let me add that the ultimate goal of most design processes is to get to a sized and prioritized backlog so you can start building and releasing product. Okay, that's very important for you to understand that. Double Diamond has been around since 2004, I believe, and was started by the Design Council. I think this approach has a fairly big following in Europe. I've never really used it. It always seemed overly process oriented, but there are people out there that swear by it. So, hey, if it works for you, run with it. Design sprints. Okay. They're a new thing started by Jake Knapp and a couple of other smart guys from Google Ventures as a way to solve big problems and get validated ideas to market quickly. They have a book out. I recommend it. It's a good read. I've used this approach, okay, and variations of it for several, large clients working on innovation focused initiatives. A few quick thoughts on it here. Design sprints are great if you're trying to get something that has a very narrow focus. Even if you're doing design sprint iterations, this isn't really meant for carving out and executing against larger chunks of work you may find yourself doing for, really big, complicated enterprise SaaS projects. Okay. It's just not a good model for that type of work. And there's really only so much you can do when you have one day to prototype and one day to test. Even if you're doing it iteratively. And the only other thing I'll mention with this one is the leading with research piece. Okay. Some agencies that have adopted design sprints as a silver bullet offering for their clients often fail to establish proper context. And they don't ever really know what it is that they're sprinting. They're just workshopping with stakeholders and doing stakeholder-centered design. And it's really meaning that research is often perceived as red tape and waste. And there's a gross miscalculation and misunderstanding of how to think creatively and strategically about research. You can always do some type of primary or secondary research to have a clear contextual understanding for what it is you're design sprinting in the first place. When you miss this, then you're making up ideas versus having your ideas informed by actual data and logical assumptions and hypotheses. So if user research wasn't important, then big tech all the way to small tech companies would not be spending millions of dollars on it a year. Okay, I speak of this from experience, but I'll stop there. I don't want to start ranting. Let's move on to Lean UX. Great stuff, and it's simple, provocative, and it really lends itself to any number of situations, as I've previously mentioned. A few things to note here. Making is very important. It could be anything in terms of fidelity. Okay. There have been times I've used cardboard and interface sketches on paper to simulate interactive machine experiences. I've even used cardboard with an iPad and duct tape to run an interactive prototype in the context of a kiosk-like experience before. Okay. The point is to focus on growing a make culture within the company you work for. For check, it could be any number of people groups you're checking and validating. You could be checking what you make with internal stakeholders or with customers or with both. So for Lean UX, the focus is on collaboratively thinking through and defining the problem space, setting a design direction, and making a potential solution that you then quickly get into the hands of real users. That's it for this. I hope this quick tour of some of the most common design approaches has been useful. We're going to drill into Agile a bit more, okay, because it's very common. So we're gonna walk through this. I'm going to walk you through a kind of big generalized picture of the software development lifecycle. So we're going to revisit some of these processes along the way. That's it for this module. I'm looking forward to connecting with you and how to optimize your personal brand. So get ready to roll up your sleeves and start sharing some of your work with the community, and I'll see you in that next module.